need, turn it on.
Just let that play for a while.
For 58 minutes, and we'll talk for 2.
15 minutes. We got a half-hour show going. Hey, welcome to the Floor U podcast. I am Paul Pleshuk, as always, joined by my partner in crime, Sonny Callahan. Sonny, how you doing?
Hello, hello. How are you?
Can't complain. Never complain. Don't ask
care.
my wife that question. She might tell the truth.
Yeah, you might get the full skinny on that one.
We are joined today by Jennifer Fowler with Concrete InSite. Jennifer, how you doing today?
I'm great. Glad to be on.
Glad to have you.
Yeah, definitely glad to have you.
It'll be an interesting conversation. I think it's going to be something that's going to be interesting for people that are in flooring right now that are considering getting into polished concrete and just want some more overall knowledge of concrete. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Thing to do, to chat with people that have been pros in the industry forever, and they're wanting to kind of expand in a area that they don't know as much about, and be the person to help them get there.
So we skipped last week's show, Thanksgiving week.
Yeah, he was lazy.
Yeah, it was me.
No, it was all me. It was all me, folks. It was 100% me. I could not find time to get it done last week. So hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving, though, for sure.
Did you?
I had a great Thanksgiving. It was really easy. I was down kind of near Atlantic City, and a bunch of us all cooked together and sat around, had way too much wine and some really great food. And
that sounds like the perfect day.
Yeah, it's a great chance to just relax. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, we have it at our house every year because we've got the most kids, so may as well have the mess here because it's already here.
You don't have to pack up all those kids and go somewhere else.
Well, plus I can have a beer or 12 and not have to drive anywhere afterwards, and that helps too.
Yeah, I stayed over. I made it easy. I just stayed over and came back the next morning. So
very nice.
Yeah, back to Philadelphia. So
yeah, we had a really low key one here at the house. We didn't even have all our kids. Just some of the family. Had another family come over who also doesn't have family in the area. So there's only 8 of us. And as soon as we were done eating, my son and we got in the car, South Carolina, drove down to Orlando and went to the car show in Daytona. So spent the weekend down in Orlando. So that was a fun time. We do that every year. So
yeah, speaking of, we should plan a school for Bike Week.
Oh, you don't go anywhere near Daytona in Bike Week.
I was there once.
Yeah.
That was a little rowdy.
Or just like when you were in college?
No, it was probably 10 years ago now, but so I say 10 years. It was probably 15, 17 years ago now.
Right.
Time flies.
Well, we'll be close next week, though, Paul. We'll be right down the road, literally 30 miles from there.
30 miles. Yeah, we're doing AMI Kids next week. We're going to do the school, and looking forward to that very much.
So Jennifer, we can tell you we didn't talk about this in a warm up at all, but one thing that we do through NAFCT is we train inspectors.
Okay.
And we train through the IICRC, and we also train through the CFI. We host their classes. But one thing that we found is there's no one teaching resilient installation training, right? So we've got the shortage of installers, but we also have a shortage of helpers. So what we've done is we've put together a 2-week course, a boot camp, if you will, where we're going to take kids who don't know anything about flooring, and we're going to teach them the basics of flooring so they can go out and get a job as a flooring technician. We're not going to call them helpers, a flooring technician, and help them find jobs, help with job placement, and get more fresh blood into the industry. So if you know anybody who's doing polished concrete who needs helpers, we're going to start doing it. We're working with a group called AMI Kids, and we've talked about this group before. AMI Kids.
Oh, wow.
It's a great nonprofit organization that who did I say that Rashad, what is her name, Paul? Oh,
Yeah.
she's married to the football player. She was on the Cosby Show.
Felicia
Oh.
Rashad.
Felicia Rashad. She is their spokesperson. Thank you. Glad you were here. Drew a blank. She's their national spokesperson, but they have locations all across the United States. And we're hoping that we can use their system to kind of feed the flooring industry a bunch of new helpers. And this is our first one next week. We're really excited for it. And we can't wait to get it going.
Well, that's interesting. Maybe at some point we can add little bits of the polishing into it, and that'll help the polishing industry and all of the flooring contractors that are going into polishing as well.
Right. No, that'd be great. Love to do it. So now we've got Paul and myself who are going to be down there. We've got Don Jewell from Loba Vacal. He's going to come down and do a day of training. We've got Graham Capabianco from Lidditz Flooring. He's going to come down. And then we've got Seth Bavarnik. Do what? Yeah, Seth's going to make it. Seth's going to come down, and he's going to do some hands-on underlayment training with these kids. So I think by the time they come out, they're going to, even if they just retain 20% of it, they're going to get a lot of information thrown at them. So I'm excited about it.
That's super. Yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting, as an add-on at some point, you could take, once that underlayment is applied, you could actually do an overlayment and polish the overlayment.
Right.
So that might be an area. Or for the surface preparation, use a concrete grinder and talk a little bit about how that grinding translates to when you're grinding in the beginning, the stages during the polishing process.
Oh, that'd be great.
That might be another way to kind of get people to understand how those two relate to each other.
Well, this 2-week class is going to be a feeder class for a 4 or 5 week, training to when they come out, they'll be a mechanic. They can actually go out and do installations. Concrete polishing would be a great addition to that course. Don't you agree there, Mr. Plichet?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the business, we're gonna involve a business aspect of it as well. Yeah. And how to run their own business if they, especially in the 5-week or the longer course, how to get into business, where to start, get into the taxes, get into everything that they need to know so that they can get out and just do it all on their own if that's what they decide, or they can go find somewhere to work for.
Well, and we see that now. We see that now with on the page that we were talking about earlier, the Flooring Scholars of America. We see these guys and gals who are making good money doing floor covering, but they don't have the business skills to manage that money, and they're ended up being in trouble where they should have plenty of money. So, the business portion of it, we need to go ahead and offer that just for existing installers too. That may be an avenue. So,
yeah, I might sit through that one myself.
I think we could all use a little brush up on that one, right?
Yeah, isn't that the case?
We actually have another announcement for a class that's coming up. It's a bit out yet, but we got it worked out. We're going to do another hardwood inspection class in Madison at the Forest Products Lab, June 10th through the 15th.
Yep.
Looking forward to that. That was the most fun I've had giving a class since we started doing this.
Yeah, last year that was absolutely the best class I've ever attended. So,
and Alex Wiedenhoff is one of the lead researchers at the USDA Forest Products Lab. He's going to be speaking again, and we're going to be doing the program in the house that they have there to be able to do some hands-on with that. That was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. And June in Wisconsin's a lot better than now.
I was going to say that. I grew up in Minnesota, and June in Madison is a good time of year versus, right about now, in fact. So.
Yeah, I thought about doing it in February, March, but that could impact attendance.
It will impact attendance unless you also do snowmobiling or some other activity.
Ice fishing, maybe.
It's bad enough we're doing February in Aliquippa for the heat weld class. So
that's not good either. I'll just tell you that their weather gets to be a little gray, cold, and rainy and snowy. Yes, all of the above. So
That's June 10th through the 15th. We'll have more information coming out about that, but everybody gets the first announcements on the podcast. So Jennifer, what was you're with Concrete InSite now. We know that you work in concrete polishing. We talk a lot on the podcast about career path and try to give the listeners and the viewers some idea of when you're in the industry, what are your options? Where do you start? And then where can I go from here? Is this, I get into installation. Is that why is that not a dead end job? And it's definitely not. So where did you start and what was your path to where you are now and what are you doing right now?
Yeah, so thank you. I'll start first with Concrete InSite is my own consulting firm. And I also am a subcontractor with LGM and Associates, which is a floor covering installing consulting firm, which I think everybody knows. And maybe you even know the name, Lou. But the history really goes back all the way to when I was 15 and I started painting houses. And so I think one of the things about being an installer is that I got the satisfaction every day of a job well done. And I saw something that was physical and visual that I could see that I accomplished each and every day. And that's either something that makes somebody excited to do more of, and they find that they're interested in the quality of it and how can they do it better and how they can do it faster and how can they be, all of the things, what equipment do you need to do it better, faster, and how do all that comes together. Or it's really boring and you hate your work and you don't want to get up in the morning and that happens. And I think if even in the very beginning stages, if that's what it would have been for me, and I wouldn't have been excited to get there and excited to learn more and excited to do this better and all that went with it, that I wouldn't have ended up in this industry. So sometimes I think it's very basic. It's even some silly job you're doing when you're very young that you either really enjoy and you want to do more of, or you really are regretting getting up in the morning and having to go do it. And so for me, that passion of kind of doing something well, seeing a result, and trying to figure out how to be better at that, I think is really the message that's moved me forward. And as I went forward, I finished college and I got into marketing and advertising, and I was a business person, and I ended up opening up a distribution company in Seattle, Washington, for surface preparation and protection equipment and materials. And the reason I did that was because I bought into a paint stripper, an industrial paint stripping company that I had the rights from the Mississippi River West. So I had all those states that I was now the master distributor for. And so I put together a distribution company so that we could then make that network of distributors to dealers and started training them and teaching them how to do these things. And that's all surface preparation. And anytime you have a surface prepared, then what do you do with it? Now we either had a failure, so we strip something off, which, you have an issue with the floor covering and you need to remove it, figure out what's the matter. And then do we use the same adhesive or not? And do we reinstall a different way, the same way? What are we doing? So in the case with me, what I found was once we removed something for somebody, and a lot of them were floor coating, and or mastics, black cutback mastics, whatever, the next thing people would be saying to me is, what should we be putting back on this? And so, or how do we get the black out of the pores? We stripped this, but we didn't get this out of the pores. What other tools can we use? What other processes can we use? So I kept searching. We kept adding more things to our distribution and what we sold. And at one point in time when I had epoxies on my line, we did vertical waterproofing, we did cleaning and sealing of masonry, we did cleaning of exterior concrete surfaces, we did all sorts of different things that we were selling products for. one of my customers said that the first concrete grinding machine was being shipped into his brother's office, which was Innovatech, which is the person that made, we used to rent their Terminators, which is a tile popping machine. So when I got the tile popping machines, we used to rent to contractors. You sat on a milk crate and they had a number 1 that was in masking tape on the side of it. And so we would rent number 1, number 2, number 3, or number 4 Terminator. And these were before they were painted, before there was anything. It was just a metal box with a milk crate on top and a couch cushion. And we taught people how to run these things, and they would pop tile. So once they pop tile, they have mastic, yada, yada. So I got to know the people at Innovatech, and when their first concrete grinder came into the United States in Seattle, Washington, they also had another one that was flown into to Vic International, which doesn't exist anymore, in Tennessee. So those were the 2 that came in at the same time. The one in Washington got basically uncrated at my office, at my warehouse, and we polished with his brother. I polished my concrete office that weekend, and we had no idea what we were doing. We bolted diamonds onto the bottom of the machine. We were just trying to figure this process out. And that's really how I got introduced. And that was in 1996, very early. So we polished that floor. It turned out great. I introduced color into that floor. It polished beautifully. I don't know. I guess we got very lucky. I guess probably what I can say. But,
beginner's luck.
And I was so excited. I can't even tell you how excited I was. I was just to the moon that this was like the most incredible thing. There was no coating on it. There was no wax on it. There was no epoxy on it. This thing was shiny. You could do whatever you wanted with this thing. And so that week, actually, the following week, I recorded a video on how to polish concrete. Later that week, I recorded another video about polishing concrete with color in it. And that really was kind of the beginning of everything that started to occur. And my office became the showroom for polished concrete for the whole West Coast. And I had architects in there daily, and I was talking to people and interfacing. And I just became so excited about everything to do with this that I started teaching the architects how to specify it, what we were doing with it, and what must be done and how to do it. And
it's good to be passionate about something, for sure.
Yeah,
It makes your job easier when you love it, right?
It is.
It's not work.
It's a lot of fun that way. So that was kind of the whole start of it, the ball. And within 6 months, I was teaching people how to polish concrete, and we actually did those at Innovatech. And we used HTC machines because that was the first one that was in the country. And I taught people to polish concrete for almost 12 years while I had my distribution business, while I had another general contracting business, and while I had another consulting business. And that was my favorite thing to do, though. So I eventually ended up moving to the East Coast. That's why I'm now in Philadelphia, and took on the role of managing the brand of a specific companies of polished concrete, their densification brand, and all of their other chemistry lines for all of their basically technical work. So I kind of moved out of having those businesses and moved into something where I could really make more of a profound difference on the polished concrete industry and concrete industry as a whole. And it was a big opportunity, especially for a woman in a man's industry, I'll have to say.
For sure.
So we talked a little bit leading into the podcast about concrete, and that is what you work with every day. And part of the discussion was how walking in, you know that there's differences between slabs. And we know that. We try to explain that in the substrates courses and so forth, that, you know, just because you see a concrete subfloor doesn't mean that it's the same as every other floor you've been on. What are some of the things that affect polishing, and and prep for polishing, and how do you address those? How do you pre-inspect the slab, and then how do you address those concerns?
So I guess there's probably 3 answers there. There's probably 103 answers, but we'll go with 3. So there's the first, which is it's new construction. So at that point, we're dealing with, hopefully we get to be ahead of the game and we can deal with what the mixed design is, or we can talk to the architects about things like flatness, FF numbers, or levelness, FL numbers, how the elevations are changing, where the joint patterns are, what the PSI of that concrete is, how they're curing that concrete, because that matters a lot. So, for example, like in floor covering, you don't want somebody to put a cure and seal product as the cure on that surface, because now you have this acrylic coating on that surface that what has to happen before you can do anything, even with floor coverings, is remove it. So, and it pollutes some of the pore structure on the surface. So you need to make sure you get rid of that, and it makes everything harder. Similarly, in concrete polishing, that's not something that we're wanting to have happen, and it's much better if the surface is water cured. So that's kind of a little bit of that path in the new construction. And then you get into an existing slab that has a floor covering on it. Well, of course, we can't see through that floor covering, so none of us know what that piece of concrete looks like at all. So at that point, if there's an opportunity, the beautiful thing is to be able to do a mock-up. So where if you know who that concrete polisher is going to be, and they can come in and actually remove part of that floor covering, uncover to get to the concrete, remove the mastic or whatever's on there, remove the overlayment, whatever underlayment, the leveling compound, whatever's all on that, to actually get to see what the concrete looks like underneath. Because we can't see where trenches are, we can't see if there are multitudes of different slab pores, we can't see if it's cracked, we can't see if it's stained, we can't see any of that. So of course that's going to be, and we're not going to cover it up again. So we don't get the benefit of, oh, there are 2 different color pores, or there's a trench, and all we need to do is not all, but what we need to do is level it out, and then we can uniformly install some sort of manufactured product to put back over it, and now it looks good again. So instead, we're stuck with, oh, there's a trench here. Is this going to be acceptable to that particular owner or that particular user? And so a lot of that then is a conversation about expectations. And what is expected, what will they accept, what can we deliver, and if those 3 things can come together and meet, then there's the opportunity to polish a floor. Then there's actually, let's do a mock-up, see what we get, and see if they actually like it. So there's a number of steps there. You know, there also can be a warehouse that's never had anything on it except maybe a hardener or something to that on it, where we can see the concrete. And in that third scenario, the question is, how hard is that surface? And how thick is that cap, and how hard troweled was that? And how hard is it going to be able for us to get to grind through that to get to the point where we're creating a flat, uniform surface that we can then build back up to get it to look like a polished surface? Because the concrete needs to be ground uniformly first, just like a foundation of a building. We need to have a good foundation before we can build back up again. In concrete grinding and polishing, that first cut or that first grind on that warehouse floor is critical in order for the rest of it to get polished properly. So in that case, you're dealing with hardness of that cap. And is the hardness of the cap because of how it was troweled, just like what we deal with in floor coverings, that needs to be penetrated, removed, get to the point where it's water absorbent, get to the point where it's clean and able to get it.
Concrete, right.
Yes, same thing. It's a similar process right there. The difference is we're also dealing with, we need to put scratches in the floor that are completely uniform across 100% of that surface to give that surface a uniform foundation. And during that process, we're also trying to flatten that floor. Because
what is your flatness tolerance when you're doing polishing?
So it's mostly up to the finish that somebody's looking for. It's really not so much about a number. I mean, in new construction, we would like to have an FF 35 or higher. And the FL number is not that important because we can polish even a slope. We can polish a ramp, for example. Okay, so we polished auditoriums that have slopes to their floors. So it's possible to polish a ramp or a slant, but if you have a very undulating slab, so there are multitudes of either curled joints, or there's just kind of a little bit more not uniform, a little undulation going on. When grinders go over it, and you guys have all seen it, you're going to see larger aggregate where it's higher, and you're going to see lower or no aggregate where it's lower. And the only way we're going to get a uniform polish is by getting to the point where we have the low and the high at almost the same level. It doesn't need to be the same level because there's some ability to have the machine kind of work that. But and that's why I said that is it's going to be driven on if that owner is looking for a completely uniform, the same size rock over the entire, or fine aggregate sand over the entire surface, then number one, we need a flatter slab to begin with. And number two, it also dictates how much grinding of that first step is going to need to be done to get those levels, those tiny little bird baths and dips in that floor to uniform themselves out. And some of that's gotten taken care of because it's no one's fault. It's certainly not the concrete polisher's fault if you have a curled joint. A curled joint is a curled joint, okay? They didn't do it. So when they go over it with their grinder, it basically scalps that because it's higher, and you're going to get more rock exposed on a curled joint. And right next to it, where it's the low part of it, you're almost going to see a hollow line where there's hardly any exposure of rock. And then you'll go into the floor, well, you might see fine aggregate or sand exposure. And that would not be the polisher's fault. So in the Concrete Polishing Council, which I've been on the technical committee, the board, and the education committee for years, we've finally gotten some standards put together for those three types of finishes where it says 90% of the floor must be X and 10% can be all aggregate, for example. And what that does is it allows for all the joints in the entire project to be exposed aggregate and the rest of the floor to be fine aggregate, and it still ends up being an acceptable floor by a standard that's written in the industry.
But doesn't that go ahead, Sonny?
Well, I was going to say, on the curling,
Yes.
how when you polish that concrete, how permeable is the surface? Are you completely capping that surface off? Because sometimes that crown will come back if you or relax and go back if if it's allowed to dry properly. So, I mean, is that an issue that you see?
Generally speaking, I would say no. So what does occur that's the issue is that the joint filler that's used, and usually it's like a 2-component polyurea type product, but that joint filler may separate from one side or the other side. And so you may have a failure of bond on one side or the other because of expansion and contraction of that slab. And that is the part that really then gets detailed back again. And concrete polishers over the years have been picking up the understanding of also doing joints and learning concrete repair because of those two areas. So then they have a concrete saw if they need it. They can actually go through and saw out failed joint sealant and replace it with clean joint sealant. And then it will bond to both sides because you have a clean cut on both sides of that joint. And therefore then will remain flush and will remain bonded to both sides. So that's really where it comes in more. It's not as evident that if we do grind down that curl, because that's probably a 32nd of an inch or something to that effect, it doesn't tend to affect and all of a sudden it's lower than the rest of the floor or did something odd like that.
Okay. So there's no, so in our world, when we have, at least when we have moving joints in the flooring world, we're supposed to carry the floor, the joint all the way to the surface. So in your world, it's still butted together. You just put some kind of sealing compound in there, and then you just go up to it. So
we are filling it. We're actually overfilling, and then we are razor blading to flush.
Right.
So we do overfill and razor blade to flush, and it is important. That's usually now done either after or before the first grind of the concrete surface. I like to do it after the first grind because the surface is cleaner and the surface is more open, and I'm able to get, and then I do the saw cut, and at that point, once that's clean, I'm able to put in the fresh polyurea joint sealant, get it flushed to that surface. Any overfill mark is then ground off by the very next diamond, and therefore there's no track of that joint sealant, which you see a lot in kind of large densification, retail chains, that type of thing, like Walmart's, because when they fill, because they're not always grinding that surface, you see the overfill on either side of a joint.
Yeah, Lowe's is notorious for that, for sure. Yeah. Jennifer, can you do us a favor and turn the notifications off on your phone? It's really loud coming through.
Got it. Definitely do that. I don't even know either. Yes. Yeah. Let's see if I can.
Just put it on vibrate. It'll be fine.
Does the
not vibrate? But yes, I'm sorry.
Where's?
Let me get that off. 1 second. I apologize. I don't know what's all going on, but
not the first time. We all have phones go off on this thing. So.
All right, cool.
How much does polishing the concrete and finishing the concrete seal the vapor emissions? Does that seal it up completely, or do you still allow vapor emissions through the slab?
It will definitely still allow vapor emissions through the slab. Mm-hmm. So it is, and so the slab will remain permeable. It certainly tightens it up because just through that process of flattening and scratching that floor and then getting scratches finer and finer and finer, and then using a densifier that penetrates and reacts with, in essence, the cement, okay, and helps make it more like it is when concrete cures. It gets harder, and it gets a little denser because it basically is adding a crystalline structure to the concrete pour. So as it gets that little bit denser, it will be less permeable, but it does not stop moisture drive overall. If you have not that bad of an issue with efflorescence or something else or moisture drive, it will probably bring it down below, and you'll be able to put a walk-off mat or whatever you want on it without really any effect. But if
right, so are you required to do moisture testing like we do in the flooring world? Do you have calcium chloride limits or relative humidity limits, or is it really not affected by the moisture?
The only time we have issues with moisture is when there's a dye or a topical stain being used. And other than that, it's really not of issue to test for moisture. So a lot of times you'll see in specifications that it's just something they have standard in there.
Right. They just copied and pasted from when they had flooring in there, for sure.
But it's,
So it's permeable enough that the little bit that comes up, it's not going to settle on the surface. You may have some efflorescence, especially at the joints, but not okay. So it's enough to pass through it.
yes, and every once in a while you'll end up with efflorescence at that surface. It will drive and leave that salt behind. And really and I find that happens sometimes when we've had a floor covering on the floor for a long period of time, and then that gets removed, and then they decide they're going to polish that surface. And because you never saw it if you had the floor covering on there. So now we take and we grind and we open that surface up. And now we're letting a lot of moisture drive easily be able to occur. And then we polish that surface. We close those pores some, but there's just so much more access to vapor drive. And there's so much more sensitivity of that floor to understand that its relative humidity and the air above its relative humidity are not in equilibrium. And so therefore that slab wants to bring moisture up. And so there are times when we end up with efflorescence at that surface. And basically the good news is in the polished concrete world, simply mopping that floor and making sure it's obviously we're not leaving water just sit everywhere. Dry mop it afterwards just to get any excess. And you do that basically until that surface just no longer is emitting that excess salt. So it's a little bit of an annoyance, but it's going to last for as long as I tell people when you see a new masonry building on the exterior, and for maybe the first year when it rains, you see that you kind of see the streaks of the mortar coming down that surface, that excess efflorescence or salts coming out of that mortar. And after about a year of raining on that building, no longer do we see that kind of white streaks coming off of that building. Similar, because it runs out of that excess salt. And same thing with the floor, it'll run out of the excess salt. And at that point, we may have moisture emitting, but we don't have the salt coming through and depositing.
So if somebody wanted to get into polished concrete, so we have a lot of installers that listen to the podcast, people that are, retailers. From the basic starting point, what do they have to do to get started polishing concrete, and where do they get trained to do that?
I have no what's going on idea with my phone. Sorry, I apologize. I'm trying to make this my notifications off, and it's getting worse. So
no problem.
There are at this stage there are a number of good distributors that distribute concrete polishing equipment and supplies, and they've done a very good job at educating their staff. I think they have very good salesmen that are good at understanding how to polish concrete, not just how to sell machines. And I think that really it's about finding a company that you're comfortable with, somewhere located nearer to where you are, and a person that you feel like you can have a relationship with, and have them show you. They have classes that are in their facilities that they can invite you to that are free, and you can watch some of these things. You can use the equipment. You can see how it works. You can, kind of get an idea. Is this something you want you or your guys to be doing? Is this something that you want to move into? Is it something interesting, or is it, more hassle, more different techniques, too many pieces of equipment, tools, too many different chemistries, then not really the vein that you're wanting to go down. And I mean, to me, that's because a lot of our equipment is very similar nowadays. I mean, everybody will tell you if they're a salesman that this one's better than this one, but I could take any one of those and polish a floor very, very well. It's just me take a little different understanding of the equipment or the diamonds, whatever that is. But as far as an overall, all of them will polish concrete and polish concrete well. and it's more of a preference and what's local, what's easy for you to get at, and what kind of jobs you're going to be working on, because there's smaller and larger equipment also that you can choose from.
So there's
Well,
not
do you
really
see-
a certification or a certifying body for concrete polishing at this point?
There's a council. I was surprised to hear that.
So there is a council, and what I will tell you is that chemical companies in our industry will certify a company to install a specific system. So a specific company will have certain products and they sell them to a specific distributor, and then that distributor with that equipment will have them come, and together they will teach how to install that manufacturer's products when polishing concrete. And you get a certificate from that manufacturer of that chemical stating that you have that basically you have the right to use that they will sell you the products, and that you're certified to use and understand their products. So there's that kind of certification. Industry-wide, the ASCC, the American Society of Concrete Contractors, absorbed the Concrete Polishing Council of America and about 2.5 years ago, and now it's called the Concrete Polishing Council. So that is part of the American Society of Concrete Contractors now. And and I know that's a lot, but
we have a lot of acronyms in our world too, so we just spit them out. People get lost.
But as of about 3 months ago, they have a certification for what they call craftsmen again, okay? And they have a certification for tradesmen. And those are 2 certifications. Currently, those are both online certifications. Those are not hands-on. They're not at somebody's facility. And
No performance testing.
Correct. No performance testing for these. The last, what's going to happen is there's going to be one more classification that's going to happen. And at that point in time, there will be almost like badges that somebody will have to get. They'll have to get a badge, and these will all be hands-on. These will be like one in hand grinding, and one in dyes, and one in joint cutting and filling, and one in, so there'll be all of these different specifics. And when you get, and I believe there are going to be 20 badges. When you get all 20 of these badges, then you will get the top certification. I believe that'll be called a Master Craftsman. And at that point in time, when that moves forward in the industry, then you'll probably start to see Master Craftsman contractors listed in a specification. But right now, it's not quite there yet as far as performance testing. So it's in the tradesman and the journeyman as far as their 2 classifications, and you can get those tests done and then have a certification from not a manufacturer, from an actual organization that is technically training people to polish concrete.
Who do you see getting into this more? Are you seeing folks in the masonry world moving over into it, or you see flooring installers moving over into concrete polishing? Because like I said before, we've seen a lot on the Flooring Installers of America page where folks are trying to learn how to polish concrete, how to put down epoxy floors, a little bit different, but, similar. So we're, for an industry for us that we're already short on qualified installers, it looks like we're losing some to that. Do you see that trend on your side, or is it more masonry construction, or is there really a difference?
I actually am seeing the same trend you're seeing. So meaning that I'm finding more and more flooring installers that are interested in concrete polishing. And I think it's, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you do quite a bit of surface preparation at times when needed in order to, and it's seeming to be more and more required because more moisture testing is required, more moisture control is being required because of all the different deals with, all
Because they only test for RH, and it's always high. So
yes, and that's another subject.
And it means nothing, people.
I tend to agree with you, but we can leave it at that.
I got to get one in every show. It just drives me crazy.
There you go. There you go. So what I'm saying is that I think that people are seeing that, they're losing out to polished concrete because there is more polished concrete happening and more companies are moving toward it that maybe used to have VCT or used to have even coatings. But so there's more interest in, hey, if I'm going to bid this, let me bid the whole project, and I could bid the polished concrete also. And so how do I do this? Well, I have a little bit of experience, or maybe even own a grinder that I've just been using to flatten humps and floors or what have you, or get the floor open or remove a coating before we're putting a new floor covering on. And so it's becoming a bridge that they're starting to want to cross, which before I think it was like, that's concrete, we work in floor coverings, or, we're flooring installers, we're not dealing with concrete, we'll leave that alone. And now it's almost becoming, I'm finding a lot of the floor covering installers are moving into this.
Yeah,
and
I'm seeing that as well. Yeah. I think too, it's just, the physical toll that floor covering takes on your body, polishing the concrete, it's got to be a lot easier on them. I'm not saying it's easy by any means. Don't get me wrong.
Correct.
But, as far as carrying, I guess you got to get the equipment in, but if you're prepping the floor anyway for flooring, but carrying in 100 boxes of wood or carrying in 30 rolls of pad and then all the rolls of the carpet, I mean, it's taxing on your body for sure.
Yeah,
I don't think it's that far from floor prep to floor polishing either. I think kind of what you're saying, it's you're even equipment wise, if you're doing large commercial work, you probably already have a portion of the tools needed to move into polishing.
Yeah. Well, we've said it before. You can take a really good resilient installer and turn them into a fantastic wood installer. But you can't go vice versa. You can't take a wood guy and make him into a resilient guy. And what's the difference? The difference is the floor prep. It all begins with the prep. So, I can see that. So,
yeah. And truly, that gives you a little bit of a leg up on contractors that were janitorial contractors that originally got into polishing concrete. So janitorial contractors were some of the first that ever got into polishing because they had swing machines. They had, that will sand a floor or whatever. Okay. Mm-hmm. So they thought that they could move in, but they didn't even know what concrete was made of. They didn't know concrete was made of aggregate, water, and, basically fine aggregate or sand and cement. That's it, right? Unless you're using admixtures. So, the amount of concrete knowledge was zero, and then they were trying to polish concrete. Whereas with the prep that everybody's already doing in floor covering installation, there's a big leg up on the learning curve that you have for just understanding that the surface needs to be ground open. Even understanding that much will get somebody so much further than starting as a janitorial contractor did. So it is more natural.
Yeah. And I know we don't have that much time left, but I would have to assume that that the concrete polishing industry has been affected by the OSHA silicate regulations, has really changed the way that they can grind the floors and work in occupied buildings or even new construction buildings for that matter. Has your industry had to adapt the same way the floor covering people have?
Very much so. If people were doing it well before and were paying attention and were pretty detailed, it didn't change a lot. Okay, so what it did change is, or if you really go by regulations, every time somebody stops the machine and lifts the machine up so they could change tooling, they're supposed to have a dust mask on now. Every time they do that, they're supposed to take and vacuum the bottom of their equipment first. then vacuum the actual concrete where all the dust fell onto, and then take the diamond tooling off, and then put the new diamond tooling on, and then put the machine down. And then once the machine starts, they can remove their gas mask, excuse me, dust mask. That's a little slip.
It's about what it is. That's what they want now.
but so that's like one of the uniquenesses, but it's not a huge difference. It is a little bit, it's an extra step or two there. But if people are being pretty mindful to begin with, it's not. The other part is that you're supposed to actually clean your floors between steps, which if you were a detailed polishing contractor, you were supposed to do that anyway also. Because you don't want to have all that dust just sitting on the floor and everybody kicking it and moving it and trades going through it, and it becomes then airborne dust for everybody on the rest of the job site. So the idea of cleaning between steps, which technically when I used to teach people to polish concrete, I always taught them to do anyway. But it would be one thing they thought they were saving time if they didn't clean. So now it's more in the mandatory stage where they need to do it if they're trying to actually meet these OSHA standards.
That makes sense.
And then the last one, which they should have had a dust mask on to begin with anyway, and they should have had a vacuum attached anyway, is when they're hand grinding and they're on their knees. So, and I get that people haven't done that, just like in many other industries, whether they're removing mortar out, retuck pointing a wall exterior, you see dust flying everywhere on a regular basis. Okay,
going around the block.
Doesn't mean that it was the right practice or best practice, but so that should have been really done anyway a long time ago. And so again, really shouldn't be changing too many people's worlds. It's just more paying attention to what they should have been doing all along.
Makes sense.
So now you're doing with Concrete InSite and working with LGM, you're doing more troubleshooting or
forensic
just consult?
So yeah, I do troubleshooting. So I will come onto a site and there's an overlayment that got poured and they just can't figure out how to polish it without it constantly scratching or constantly pulling aggregate out, or they can't get the color to go in properly and the floor is just not staying with color in their floor, or there's a system that somebody specified where they, an architect specified 4 different products all to go on to one system, and they weren't manufactured by the same company and no one's ever put them on top of each other, and they basically,
architects don't do that. Come on.
No, never made a bad spec.
So one fish eyes from the other one that it's supposed to penetrate, and it never dries, or whatever all those things are that happen in everybody's worlds. And those are things that I will come and kind of look at, and I'll be able to either suggest we need to shift a product and come up with a comparable way to do it, or give them another approach in order for it to function. So those types of things. I do a lot of work with specifications, where I look at specifications prior to them starting projects. I will go out and do, in the beginning, work with them on a mock-up to figure out the best approach to getting a job done the quickest, with the best quality and the best productivity, so that they're in essence, their gross profit stays at how they bid it, versus what what usually happens is that the salesman bids it one way, and then they hand the torch off to the crew, and the crew's like, this isn't possible. We can't get this done by Wednesday and do everything that was promised. And that the lack of communication. I'm also doing a lot of work with companies in their upstart, with helping them figure out how to standardize and what steps they need to take to move through an actual concrete polishing project, so that as they go, the projects are successful, instead of tripping and falling and then calling me later and saying, how come this happened? We're in a world of hurt. So those are some of the things I have fun doing with contractors and really getting them started up on the right foot.
Well, I'm just amazed that they call you on the front end. Usually it's on the back end.
There's a lot of back end, but the floor covering installers that are, maybe they started in it and they bought some equipment and now they're like feeling over their heads. I've been working with a lot of those lately, and I've really been able to help them just kind of get through that learning curve much, much faster to the other side, where they're feeling confident that they can approach a project, they can bid it correctly, they're reading the spec correctly, they understand what they really have to do to get there, and their profits are going up and up, which is, trying to do.
We've been joined by another guest. Who's our new guest there, Sonny?
This is my youngest granddaughter, Aubrey. She was asking where I was, so I said, let her in.
Hey, Aubrey.
Say hi. Wave, at least.
No.
Yeah, and here comes my other daughter, my granddaughter,
Hi.
Emily.
Hi.
Hi, Emily.
It's a family affair. Say hi, Emily. You're on our podcast, on Grandpa's podcast. Say hi. Say hi. All right, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt us.
It was actually probably perfect timing. We're coming up on the hour. Jennifer, where can people reach you, get a hold of you if they've got questions, if they want to get into, if they need assistance with an upcoming project or have an issue that they're dealing with right now? How can they get a hold of you?
Either my phone number, 215-828-9797, or my email, which is concrete InSite, spelled like job site, INSITE, @gmail.com. Either one of those, I'd be happy to chat with you and see if I can start moving the ball in the right direction or move it a little quicker.
Sonny, what you got going on?
I'm always doing something, but I really enjoyed this conversation, Jennifer. I'm glad you were able to make it. It was one of those things. Peter Craig said you need to call this person. So when Peter Craig tells me to do something, I do it, and I'm glad I did. I'm glad we did it right away. So it's we had a good time.
No, I appreciate it. Training is something I love to do, and I do a lot of on-site training with contractors as well. And so if there's anything I can help out with people, or maybe moving forward, we'll end up putting the concrete polishing into part of one of your 4-week projects. And
that'd be great.
I really enjoy that type of work and love to spend a little more time with both of you.
Yep, I'm going to definitely take you up on that one. I think that's something that we could train young people to do, and they would enjoy it. And that's the first way to getting someone into our trade, is finding something they like to do. So I'm excited about it. I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, that goes right back to what I was saying about that job of satisfaction of a job when I was painting a house at 15.
That's right.
That type of thing, and when you see that surface and when it pops the first time, and that guy's behind that polisher, and their face lights up, they're hooked.
You got them. Got them. Exactly. Yeah.
At that point, they're suckered into the industry. I mean, they're hooked on the industry.
Exactly how I look at it. Yeah. And their phones are out, and they're taking pictures, and they're on it. At that point, they're on it. And, when that lights up, some part inside lit up. And that's,
well, you said on it twice. You owe Shonocks 50 cents, because you got to give them a quarter every time you say on it. That's theirs.
All right. So next time you see them, hand them 50 cents and I'll owe you.
So as always, if you'd like to be on the podcast, you can get a hold of me at paul@floorupodcast.com. You can find the podcast at floorupodcast.com, floorupodcast.com on YouTube, on iTunes, on Google
Spotify.
Play, everywhere. Hopefully, if you're seeing this, you already figured that out. Please subscribe on YouTube. I'll try not to be one of those annoying YouTubers. Hit that subscribe button
Link.
on the bottom. Oh, it's annoying. It's annoying. But
Or on
thank you.
Facebook, Floor You Podcast on Facebook. I think that's where we get the majority of it, the traffic.
But thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll be here next week. If we ever start figuring out guests a week in advance, we'll let you know who's going to be here. But thank you very much, Jennifer.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you. I enjoyed it.
It's a pleasure.
All right. Play us out.
Hit a win, stepping in, turn it on.
It's a family member of his.
Above and beyond, I'm a phenomenon.